unsolved mysteries, unique history, unanswered science, baffling true crime, cryptids, the strange and unusual can all be found here. So, come out of the rain and follow us across the creaking floor, through the secret passage, into the realm behind the bookcase. Welcome back, everybody, behind the bookcase.
Hello, hello.
Well, today we are going to talk about episode 3 of Crime Scene by Netflix.
Down the rabbit hole.
Down the rabbit hole we go. It was pretty interesting. They started out with the detective that we've seen on the other couple of episodes, and they were talking about how Elisa was found or what happened after she was found. So, obviously, lots of police on the scene. The water tank, instead of pulling her out from the top, they wanted to be really careful, also make sure they got all the evidence. So they drained the water out of the tank first, and they actually cut a hole near the bottom so that they could gently pull her out, as well as anything else that floated to the bottom.
It's probably the safest move of getting the body out as evidence.
Yeah.
And leaving it where the clothes were, and then just pulling everything out all at the same time. I mean, you have a watery mess to begin with anyway, but...
Yeah, and I mean, I would imagine you would want everything that, I mean, they would have to have drained it before or after anyway. So I think that that made a lot of sense. And then they could also get in there and get the clothing properly and do all the tests that they needed to do. The detective went into kind of their side of the case, which was obviously the body was the evidence that they had, pretty much the main evidence that they had. So they first started by fingerprinting the body.
Yeah, you would not think a fingerprint would survive being in water, but they did say they didn't know how long she had been in the water.
That's true.
We'll get to that later, but based on the way...
And obviously, pulling her out at that point, they didn't have that information.
Right.
But they could see that there was no evidence of violence on her, no strangulation or beating or anything that they could see outwardly that that indicated that something malicious had happened to her. So
yeah, I think they specifically mentioned no fractured bones. So no fractures or fractured bones, bullet holes, stab wounds, or sexual assault.
Yeah, well, like I mean, I'm talking right now. We're talking about what they saw as soon as they pulled her out. So not going into the actual autopsy yet, but
the obvious things.
Just outward. There's no bruising.
Bullet
there's
holes,
no
stabbing.
Yeah, like they could tell probably whether if she had a broken bone or something like that. Probably could have been obvious.
Probably could tell most of that from the initial. I don't know what all the autopsy did, but we'll get to that point later.
Yeah,
and how long that took.
Yeah, but basically they kind of ended that part of the beginning part of the show with just they didn't even really know whether they had a crime or not.
Maybe still don't.
Yeah. So a day after she's found, the news media gets wind of it, and it's an all-out media frenzy.
Yeah, kind of that's when all hell breaks loose. And not only is it a media frenzy, but also the internet sleuths come in droves, as well as what they just call, like, literally tourists. Curiosity tourists, maybe you could call them, who just want to go and play with the elevator or go around the emergency doors and walk out of them and see if the alarm goes on and off and try to figure this out themselves. And it really kind of overran the hotel there for
Well, I
period
mean,
of time.
and we've talked about how much interest there was in this case already, just with her being missing and that elevator footage being shown. So all the people that were already invested and really cared about what happened to her, and were curious, of course, were all kinds of people, but they basically came in droves and wanted to stay in the hotel and wanted to walk around the hotel, and try and figure it out. In the show, they actually show footage of a couple of people that were successfully able to go through the hotel, but they said that there was very high security and they didn't want people doing that. But certain people were kind of given access and certain people were um, monitored and not allowed. So um, it was it, the footage that those internet sleuths showed were very telling.
Yeah, there was, and I think they front loaded at least these pieces of information into the episode was and good on a couple of these guys who actually were doing things legitimately that were pretty good and investigatory techniques, like going to the elevator, pushing all the buttons, and if you're on a certain floor, noticing if the light goes on or off.
Mhm.
Does the stop button, the carriage stop, work on the elevator and things like that? And they did figure out that she probably did hit the carriage stop and that she might have been on the 14th floor. Because if you go back and watch the video where she hits every button all in a row, the 14th floor immediately goes out, indicating that's the floor you're on and the door is open.
Yeah. So I thought it was fascinating because it really shed some light. I mean, I've watched this video so many times, and then this just was kind of an aha moment. But you literally see her push the numbers down in a row, and they showed a well lit version of the numbers, and it's actually three rows of numbers. And so she's pushing the numbers in the very center row. And so you can see her click all of the buttons. And then you see her skip down and click under the buttons. So so they showed two things. She's clearly pushed the hold elevator button, which is a big piece of the curiosity of the elevator footage. And then, secondly, you can clearly see that when she clicks the very first button, the light does not come on. What they proved was that the light on the floor that you're on will not come on when it's pushed. So if you were on the 10th floor and you push all the buttons, then the 10th floor would be dark. And so they were able to determine, looking at the buttons, that it was the 14th floor that she was on. So,
But that kind of contradicts something from the last episode, or the first episode, maybe, I think, where they had indicated that the guard dogs had tracked the scent to the open window leading to the fire escape on the fifth floor. And while that could have been a legitimate track, she stayed on the fifth floor. Did they not check the roof with the dogs at the time, or did they not go to other floors? Did they stop? Because it seems like if she was on the 14th floor for that period of time, at least the 4 minutes that we have the video of, if
mhm.
not more, wouldn't they have gotten the scent hit on the 14th floor around the elevator? So I and they one of the detectives said that what was he saying, that um yeah, the original scent dogs weren't wrong, but then they don't ever go back and circle back to the fact that likely it was the 14th floor, and then they admit that they never took the dogs up to the roof or
You
anything
know
like
what that
that.
makes me think of, though? So one of the other bits that the internet sleuths had mentioned was, and they actually showed footage when they got access to the roof, and they could see clear signs that people still to this day were up, or whenever it was that they were up there, that people had been up there partying. There were cigarette butts, pizza boxes, graffiti
Right.
everywhere. So what if she went out of that fifth floor window and went up to the roof?
Or I was thinking the reverse. What if she was with some people on the roof, having a few beers, smoking
Yeah.
cigarettes, whatever, went down to pee or anything else, and just went from the roof to the 14th floor, and then I don't know,
Well,
maybe
that's what
that's
I'm
when the
saying. Like,
elevator
if the
footage
dog
occurred.
tracked on the fifth floor, maybe they all left from the fifth floor and went up to party on the roof. Well, naturally, going back down the first floor, because usually the very top floor of a hotel, correct me if I'm wrong, so it's got 15 floors, but most likely
HVAC,
there's
maybe.
not an
Yeah.
actual rooms up there. So probably the first, like you said, that's a good thought, that the first place she would have left if she felt uncomfortable and was trying to escape, or she just needed to go to the bathroom, or whatever reason she would have gone back into the hotel. Maybe she did get intoxicated or something. We don't have. I don't think we found out the toxicology report yet,
Not
but
on this one, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Anyway, so but either way, if she just needed to get out of there, she could have been up there and gone back down, and then had the episode with the elevator. So she
Right.
stopped the elevator, and I don't think she realized that she clicked that stop or hold elevator button, and she's starting to kind of like panic because the elevator isn't moving.
Hmm.
So, um, I think that was definitely something that I really appreciated, that footage from those people that went in to investigate, because that really shed some light on what she was actually pushing, and that she it's pretty clear that she clicked that hold elevator. Um,
Yeah. So while the hotel was being overrun, some people are actually getting some pretty solid evidence.
mm.
And I don't know if the police tried the same thing with the elevator, but they seem to allude that they have that evidence because of those individuals, which is interesting.
Well, we do
And
anyway. I mean,
right.
but
Um,
and I also think that um, it was interesting that they actually took the camera and showed. So when the end of the footage that we see from the elevator, you're seeing her leave to the left and you don't see her again. So they said they actually took the camera and showed that if you exit to the left there, then you go left again, and that's where that window was. So they actually showed you a visual of where the fire escape window was, and then they also showed that the other direction was an actual stairwell that had access to the roof. However,
right.
that roof access had a alarmed door, supposedly.
However, I think that's what one of the internet sleuths had. He had leaned against it or into it or pushed the bar to see if the alarm went off, and the alarm never went off.
Right. But you hear from Amy Price, the hotel manager again, who says that it was working order, and the cops checked it and it was in working order, and they would have gotten an alert. So I'm not sure who,
And by
it's
that
one of the,
description, I don't know if that person was shy and just leaning up against it, pushing the bar in just to see if the alarm would go off, and didn't want to fully disengage the door. But typically on these types of doors, you have to break the,
yeah, you have to actually
you have to
open it.
push the door to,
Yeah.
yeah, not just push the bar in.
Yeah.
If it's one of those with the bar that goes
So,
across horizontally. So maybe they didn't take it all the way because they didn't want to cause a fuss. So I don't
or
even
maybe
know
they
if that,
did. I mean,
yeah, but the way that information was delivered by that person, I don't know if I would
yeah.
throw that out the window.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
But it does bring up the point that there is another access point to the roof that someone in the hotel could have had a key to not set the alarm off. So that, it kind of fed into some of the speculations of, was it somebody that had a key that led her up there in that direction rather than the whole window fire escape thing. And there's really no way to really know because we don't have any kind of camera footage.
Yeah, and speaking of which, I think the only interaction from the hotel, or the only thing that they had a visual on her that entire day, was her walking in with the box, and that was the box from the last bookstore.
Yes, so they the detective said that obviously the hotel employees were suspects, or they wanted to look into him, but they really found no evidence of that. But they had gone back to the footage and looked for any other footage of her in the hotel, and they saw this interaction with two gentlemen bringing a box or handing off a box to Elisa, and they left and she went to her room or wherever. And so that was suspicious until they found out that all the heavy books that she had gotten from the last bookstore were actually delivered to her, so she didn't have to carry them.
Right. So we're kind of back into that same scope of reference with individuals she was interacting with. It was people from the last bookstore, maybe hotel staff, and maybe the roommates she was with in that room from the
Mhm.
fifth floor that night on the roof, potentially,
Well,
or someone else,
I think I don't think
or
she
by
was.
herself.
Yeah, she wasn't. I don't think she was friends with the people she was staying with because they got her kicked out of her room because they complained about her.
They
But
did complain, didn't they?
yeah, she got moved.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean she didn't meet other people in the hotel. I mean, obviously, it was probably all younger travelers and people like that staying on in that part of the hotel, not the other part of the Cecil. But who knows what was
Right.
who was up on the roof, because the entire Cecil would have had access from some way or another.
It just seems strange, and I know they sometimes time jump through the episodes, and they talk about in the 70s, 80s, maybe even currently, but the fact that there's people that will go up there to commit suicide and throw themselves off of the building, but then sometimes it's just a party.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and maybe sometimes it leads to one of those acts or
yeah, who
things.
knows? But I think the time that she was there, which was 2013, um, it was mainly the international tourists, maybe younger, saving money.
Yeah, that's what I would
And
think.
yeah,
A
they
lot of
found the fire escape and went to
probably.
the roof and
I mean, it
had a
was
few
probably a
beers on the
mix, I would
roof.
think, because,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean that, and they alluded to the fact that she had been posting, or she had in the past posted some because of her condition, her bipolar condition, that she had sometimes had bouts with depression, and actually talked about committing suicide. But she was always kind of turning it around, like, I really feel like this, but I'm going to wait till tomorrow and hopefully I'm going to feel better. And um, always seemed to kind of have a handle on it. But the show seemed to highlight that a little bit, that she did have some tendencies or issues that she was dealing with because of her bipolar.
Right. And that's one of the things the police did thoroughly investigate, because she had such a proficient backlog of social media posts, was the mentions and of bouts of depression and suicide and being bipolar. But that's the one thing that I took away, and I think the lead detective alluded to that he took away, is there was always that turning the corner moment of
Yes.
now, of course, there could be maybe a time that she didn't, um, and maybe that time was around this time. But I took that away as well, that she seemed aware, if that's the right.
That she had, yeah, that
Yeah.
she was having, that she
Hmm.
had sometimes episodes. I think so too. But I mean, I think they do have to bring it up sometimes because they don't know what's at this point. They have no idea what's happened,
Right.
and so and they don't have any evidence that foul play was involved. So they have to look at whether she could have, you know, whether she could have done something to herself. So
So here's what we have. We have Elisa is now discovered. It is not a homicide, but we do have a body. It's the only evidence we have right now. Internet sleuths and tourists are taking over the hotel, running amok, if you will. And basically, it's a little bit of chaos. So this is a perfect setup to lead into some of the conspiracy theories, I suppose. This episode is called Down the Rabbit Hole, I feel, for a reason.
are you ready to go?
Let's go. So take us there.
um, so one of the basic uh, ones is, was there a police cover up? And so
That's your go to 101
yeah, so
conspiracy theory.
people were suspicious that they didn't find her when they first went to look for her. And, um, I mean, I didn't really feel like they had a ton of reason to suspect a police cover up.
Well, the LAPD, I think in this case, you had some people that were qualified, doing their job, and were on the ball. This isn't one of those cases where I'm going to throw the police under the bus right off the bat or even say they look suspicious. They had 20 detectives on this case before the Dormer issue. Um, then they got just stretched beyond their means. But I think, especially in that side of town, people viewed the police as the man, the other, whatever you want to call them. They just didn't have a good reputation. The LAPD was probably corrupt at that time, as they were in like a couple of earlier decades. So I think just from your average citizen from that neighborhood's point of view, it's the police. So what are you
So
going to do? That's
they're
going to be your
obvious, yeah.
default, probably,
So I mean, I don't really have
position.
a lot to
I
say on
don't
that.
feel the police did a horrible job.
Yeah,
I don't know why they didn't take the dogs through the whole hotel when they said early on that they had checked 600 doors, 2 basements, and started this laundry list of things, yet the dogs didn't go past the 5th floor.
yeah,
I
and I don't
don't.
know if maybe we'll find out more information,
Right.
because people do feel like there was a possibility for police a police cover up. So maybe there's more out there that we haven't learned yet.
All right. So maybe we'll circle back to that one.
Uh,
But to me,
yeah.
yeah, we'll leave that one for now.
So
All right.
the
What else
next
do we have?
the next one that they covered was the um and a lot of these are just really weird coincidences that you have to kind of scratch your head about. And the next one is one of those, and it's that the movie Dark Water had a scene in it where a mother and daughter are staying at kind of a seedy hotel, very similar looking actually. And the daughter climbs up on a water tank that looks very similar and is pushed in to the water tank and is found in there. And
Wearing a red hoodie or
yeah,
red
the
jacket.
red
Similar.
hoodie is what makes people think it. You see the picture of the little girl drown in the red hoodie floating in the water and everything. So it just has a lot of similarities, and it came out before Elisa died. I don't know exactly what year, but
I don't
we
remember the year either, but I remember seeing that movie in the theater and not being that impressed. So we're not going to be doing a movie review on this one, and maybe I'm wrong and I just remember it incorrectly. But we saw it in the
it's been a
theater. I
while.
remember it's
Yeah,
very slowly paced and just dingy and dark. And anyway, but it did. I do believe that was prior to 2013,
yeah, it
and
was.
so there. So does somebody
Yeah.
on the movie set
So some of the
know
the
something?
theories on that was it somebody copycatting? Did they have some see her in that red sweatshirt and just have like some kind of need to kill her and put her in there?
That one to me is just silly. If you're
I,
gonna copycat, you just happen to be waiting for your copycat trigger in your brain to the switch to flip, and
yeah,
you happen to see somebody, and they're like, "Oh, this hotel has a water tank, also. How
yeah.
perfect!"
I mean, I just don't see
That's
that.
silly.
Yeah.
Could it be somebody that worked on the set that had something to do with a murder, a screenwriter or something like that.
Let's
That's
just think for
almost as silly.
yeah. I think
Um,
we need to dead end that
yeah. All right.
rabbit
We'll leave that one.
trail.
The next one I'll bring up, and this one's a little ridiculous because this is what happens when people just jump on the internet and come to conclusions way too quickly. And it's a Mexican death metal singer, goes by the name of Morbid. I think his real name is Pablo. Forget the last name, but Pablo, aka Morbid. And he did a death metal video while he was staying at the Cecil, however, in 2012, which was a year before. But because he's standing in front of imagery of serial killers and he's standing outside the hotel and he has a song on that same album that's a death by drowning, it must have been him,
Yeah,
and it
that's
wasn't.
just putting it's the same as the movie. It's just
Right.
you have to stretch really far to really think. I mean, a
But
death
also to
metal
not
guy is
know
going to sing about death, you know? I
correct.
mean, like that's
Then
the
the
genre.
him staying in the hotel was a year before, and um, doing the real detective work. He in 2013 he was in Mexico in a recording studio under contract. That during those months that
Yeah,
that was so it just couldn't possibly have been him. He was like off of the LAPD's suspect list within 5 minutes. But
check it out,
everybody
right?
else, was all on the internet making videos about it,
Yeah.
and it caused some issues. And I think to this day, he's having problems with his music career because the story of him being Elisa Lam's killer is just kind of following him since
Yeah.
then.
And just to keep on the coincidence line, they also brought up something which didn't really have anything necessarily to do with the murder itself, but they mentioned that a bunch of people online had gone to the kind of the back end registry of the last bookstore's website, and their zip code on there is listed for a Canadian zip code that when you put it into Google Earth, it actually puts the pin exactly on the cemetery, not, middle of town or anything like that, but the cemetery where Elisa Lam was buried. This pin goes to, it's just a weird coincidence. And it really doesn't say that, it really didn't seem to mean anything. Like, I don't know if
But
people were
again,
accusing the bookstore of being involved, but
it's like trying to string things together that have no correlation whatsoever in my mind because you
it is
have
weird.
it is very strange. And you said that this was one of the proprietors of the last bookstore
I
website
mean, they
that
showed
was.
it as a registry, which I'm guessing was a registry for the website itself.
So the site designer, maybe the owner, maybe somebody
Right.
that had something
But
to do with building the company had um, a zip code.
but
But
in Canada, in the town where the cemetery
right,
is,
but the whole entire
they're
zip
in
code's
New
not a
York.
cemetery.
I know, but
So the coincidence that the pen falls on the cemetery, depending on
that's
are
very
you using an
coincidental.
iPad, an iPhone, a desktop, would it be different? If you were the CSS code is
Well,
going to open up that map
no,
depending on what
the
device
pin
you're
is
on.
going to be in the same spot and the
Yeah,
same
then why does
coordinates.
this cemetery have a zip code? That one I just thought was it's an interesting
it,
coincidence, but also I'm gonna put that on the silly
it was
side of
just
things.
kind of it was just weird, and it didn't really have anything to do with her death, but
I don't think it has anything to do with anything.
it was weird. Okay,
But
well,
interesting.
we
Yeah,
disagreed with that one.
yeah.
And then the last one that actually was kind of out there too, but all these things have something in the real world that can be, that can cause people to wonder. Was basically 3 days after Elisa was found, a bad tuberculosis outbreak was reported in the area. And even Amy Price, the hotel manager, said that they had gotten a warning about it during the middle of all this, that there was an outbreak. And so they were trying to get everybody to get tested. for tuberculosis. And
Now this is my kind of conspiracy theory. If you're going to throw a conspiracy theory out there because it involves something that really happened, it was a real outbreak
mhm.
of tuberculosis that was happening. It involves the CIA slash deep state, which you got to throw them in anytime you have a good conspiracy theory, right? And you're going to get to this in a minute, but the name of something. This is your coincidence. This is, I liked this
Yeah.
one.
So I mean, so basically, that they had this huge tuberculosis outbreak, and they were rounding up people, and obviously they knew that it was going to spread quickly through the homeless population that was everywhere. So, um, a lot of people thought that this might be a plot for that they were actually trying to infest the homeless with tuberculosis. And the interesting thing that was that the the test, it was a brand new test that they
Right.
were running to test for tuberculosis, and it was called the Lamb dash Elisa test.
You can't make that up.
Like,
I mean, you could, but it would be ridiculous. That was actually the name of the test.
weird.
Like,
Like,
just last name, first name.
I mean, was it just did the person that happened to invent it, this new testing technique?
Was aware of the crime and called it that because they were interested, or, yeah. But there's your interesting conspiracy,
But what does that have to do
I
with
would say.
tuberculosis either? Like,
And also, if you say, well, how ridiculous would it be to have, FBI, CIA, police insert whoever into the sentence, you know, maybe produce an outbreak in an area to clean up the neighborhood. I'm going to think back to some other cases that we're going to do videos on later. I can't think of any in the US that comes to mind, but overseas and in times of war, or on our own military citizens, we have definitely done things like the Tuskegee incident and things like that. So, is it outside the realm of reality? No, not at all. Is it still maybe a juicy one, but a conspiracy theory and has nothing to do with anything? Probably. But I think that one uh, has teeth,
what?
even as far fetched as it
Yeah.
probably is. That one's interesting.
Well, it got people stirred up, and
Yeah, for
I
sure.
mean, and the last one was basically that the hotel had just seen so much trauma and um, been afflicted basically for
This
its
one's
whole
good
history,
for all you Ghost fans.
that the hotel itself was evil and had ghosts that could have caused her to commit suicide, or even done it to a ghost could have actually put her in the tank.
The Amityville Cecil.
Which I will say that one of the facts that I learned that I just can't get over. So, first of all, I want to correct when we were talking on the last episode about the lid on the water tank being maybe locked. We
Right.
we did find out in this episode that the lid was actually a lipped square lid. It weighed about 20 pounds, so it wasn't too difficult to get off. But the lid would have had to, would have been picked up before she went into the water. But when they found her, when Santiago found her, the lid was on the tank. He took the lid off. So, who put the lid back on after she went in?
So we still don't have a homicide yet, and it's a lot more. There's a lot more plausibility to this being an accidental death at this point. If you only have
Except,
to open a 20-pound lid, however, when you're 90 pounds soaking wet, as you know, Elisa was. She was a very thin in shape person. And I don't know if she worked out or what she could lift, but it would be very awkward to get into a tank and then try to put a 20-pound lid back over your head and fasten it to where the lip went past the
Perfectly on the
edge,
square.
yeah, and fit it back on, only to drown.
Yeah. That
Unless you're in a state or a fit, you know, something could have been happening, but it's very awkward. I don't know. There's a 50% more plausibility that it's an accidental death, but then you put the lid back over yourself. That
yeah.
takes it in the other direction to
And
me, that there probably was somebody else involved.
yeah, that's the biggest suspicion to me, because she could not have reached the lid once she went in the tank. They established that. There was no ladder in it, and she would have dropped down and been in the water.
So is this your ghost theory?
Well, somebody put
The
it on.
ghost did it.
So until we have a person, I'm still not going to count out a ghost.
Now they did find that her lungs were full of foam.
No, there was no foam. There was no foam, no water.
I thought it was inconclusive, that they were saying that there was congestion in foam, but that could be she had a cold and that's what happens when you drown. Maybe, well, I'll have to look at that point again, but I thought that there was like foam in the lungs. But anyway, um, it
Well,
was still, the coroner still said it was a suspicious death, and leading to the point where we're trying to get the toxicology reports.
so yeah, just to start back over with that, the medical examiner is introduced. His name is Jason Tovar, and he is the coroner. And so he kind of went through how he looked at the body once he got her. And so the first thing that he looked at was the decomposition state. He said there was moderate decomposition, but there was no way to tell how long she had been in the tank. So even the medical examiner could not say exactly how long from when she went missing she had been in the tank. Um, and then he went into that they did do a sexual assault test, and that there was no sexual assault. They did a rape kit, and there was nothing found, and there was no external injuries, which we already knew, and no internal injuries. And then the he mentioned that there was no fluids in the lungs, but she still could have drowned, which I think is weird. Like, how do you not have anything in the lungs?
I thought, and maybe we should go revisit that piece, but I thought he was still alluding to the fact that it was a very suspicious death, congestion or something. And could there have been death before the water tank?
That's interesting. I don't think he made that.
I don't think that point was.
Yeah, I
brought
don't
up.
think it was either. Like, could he? But to me, he said she still could have drowned. But on my end, I'm like, she was already dead.
Yeah.
I mean, that just made me way more suspicious, because if she had water in her lungs, we would still be in that same boat of who knows. But I don't know, it just seems a lot more suspicious with her not having fluid in her lungs.
I think so as well. All right, well, I think that's going to wrap this one. So this was a strange episode because we didn't get a lot of evidence, but we have some police testimony on some of the investigation. But this really did go down the rabbit hole of tourists and internet sleuths running around the hotel, trying to play detective while the detectives are trying to solve the case. We have everything from death metal musicians that were in the hotel a year before being blamed, to ghosts flying through water tanks,
And don't forget those two big pieces of the puzzle that we did get, which was her pushing the stop elevator button on the 14th floor, which
Being on the 14th
was
floor.
the puzzle piece that I wanted to know.
Right.
And then also the lid of the tank, which we
had no luck.
Yeah, which we learned. If you would please subscribe and share with others and like. Obviously, we are a new channel and we really appreciate any support.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.